Forget the white gowns, the romantic proposals, and the perfectly curated Pinterest boards. In the Middle Ages, getting married was less about love and more about land, political power, and, believe it or not, a frenzy to grab a piece of the bride's clothing for a sliver of fortune. This is the reality of life and love in a world ruled by steel, superstition, and surprisingly complicated social rules. Welcome to the year 1358. Our story unfolds across the vast, often muddy, and always surprising landscapes of England, a country still grappling with the echoes of the Black Death and the ceaseless struggle of the feudal system. This is a journey that will take us from the smoky, shared sleeping quarters of a peasant's croft to the frigid stone halls of a powerful noble's castle, revealing a world far stranger and more complex than the fairy tales. Our main narrative thread begins with the wedding of Lady Isolde, the 17-year-old daughter of the Earl of Ashworth, a man whose lands stretched across 3 counties. For Lady Isolde, the news of her upcoming marriage was not a proposal, it was a decree. At the age of 12, her father, a pragmatic man of immense power, had begun seeking a suitable match. Her future husband, Lord Alaric de Montfort, was a powerful, grim-faced baron twice her age, known for his formidable, if sparsely furnished, keep in the northern marches. The union had nothing to do with personal affection, which was considered a dangerous frivolity among the elite, and everything to do with solidifying a defensive alliance against a rival earl and joining their considerable tracts of forest and farmland. Isolde was merely the most valuable piece of property in the transaction. The wedding journey began not with a ring, but with the detailed negotiation of the dowry. Isolde's family promised Lord Alaric a staggering sum of silver coin, 24 head of cattle, and the rights to a lucrative grain mill on the River Ouse. This was the bride's donation to her new family, a non-refundable investment designed to increase the groom's wealth. Even if Alaric were to cast Isolde aside later, he would keep every penny and every cow. This was the first and most important financial agreement of the marriage. Next, a formal wedding notice, a document detailing the names, families, and planned date, was posted on the door of the local cathedral. This was not an invitation, but a public check. If anyone knew of a pre-existing contract, a hidden blood relation, marriage between cousins was a frequent complication, or any other legal reason the couple could not wed, they were commanded by the church to speak up. The penalty for remaining silent and allowing a prohibited marriage was severe.
On the morning of the wedding, Isolde's chambers in the castle were a flurry of activity. The idea of a pristine white wedding dress was centuries away. Instead, Isolde was dressed to display the immense wealth and status of her family. Her gown was a heavy, floor-length garment of deep, rich blue velvet, a color that symbolized purity and piety, trimmed with the rare, exotic gold-spun silk her father's merchants had acquired from Italy. Her hair, though long and beautiful, was pulled back severely to reveal a high, plucked forehead, the ultimate sign of aristocratic beauty in the 14th century. A simple circlet of real flowers, not a diamond tiara, rested on her head. Her entire outfit was worth more than a peasant might earn in 50 years. As Isolde was led out, a bizarre tradition took hold, the bride chase. Guests, both minor nobles and higher-ranking servants, would lunge toward her. They weren't trying to harm her. They were desperate to tear a small piece from her expensive clothing. Because her dress was a symbol of her family's good fortune and fertility, any scrap of the fabric was believed to confer luck and wealth upon the possessor. Isolde's ladies-in-waiting had to physically shield her, ensuring only the most minor tears occurred, while a few frantic guests, failing to get a piece of the dress, instead made a grab for her blue garter. Presenting a captured garter to one's own lady was a sign of devotion, promising a faithful marriage. The actual religious ceremony, surprisingly, did not begin inside the cavernous cathedral. It took place outside the main church doors. This was largely a practical measure, as the church wanted to make a clear distinction between the binding legal vows and the sacred nuptial mass that followed. Isolde stood rigidly to the left of Lord Alaric, a position of submission derived from the biblical belief that Eve was created from Adam's left rib. The priest began with the familiar query, "If any person present knows of any reason why these two should not be joined." But unlike the modern version, this was a moment of true legal suspense. The priest then demanded the couple confess any hidden reasons themselves. Only once cleared did they exchange rings. The ring was placed on the fourth finger, as it is today, based on the ancient belief that a vein ran directly from that finger to the heart. Finally, the couple was allowed to enter the church for the full Mass, now legally bound as man and wife.
The post-ceremony celebration was a staggering spectacle of wealth. Alaric's hall was draped with banners and packed with hundreds of guests. The tables groaned under the weight of roasted boar, venison pie, countless loaves of hard, gritty wheat bread, and enormous barrels of watered wine and strong ale. Entertainment was provided by traveling minstrels who sang not of romantic love, but of heroic deeds and dynastic virtues. The centerpiece of the food ritual was not a sugary tiered confection. Instead, guests were encouraged to bring small, spiced buns and stack them as high as possible in front of the newlyweds. The object was for the bride and groom to attempt to kiss over the precarious mountain of buns. If they succeeded without the stack toppling, it was a guarantee of prosperity and many children. This bizarre custom, a testament to the era's superstition, is the literal foundation of the modern tiered wedding cake. The evening ended with the most shocking tradition to modern sensibilities, the bedding ceremony. This was a raucous community event, not a private moment. The entire assembled company followed the couple to the newly furnished marital bedchamber. Female guests would ceremonially disrobe the bride, while male guests did the same for the groom, often stealing the groom's shoes and throwing them playfully at the couple. The attendees, frequently drunk on ale, would sing bawdy songs and offer explicit, loudly shouted advice on the marital duties. The final step was the communal tucking in, where witnesses would physically pull the bed curtains closed, formally sealing the marriage. It was a crude, public display, designed to confirm the marriage had been consummated, a legal necessity in the eyes of the church and state, and therefore could not be annulled. Isolde, exhausted, humiliated, and now officially a married baroness, finally lay in the cold, linen-draped bed beside her stranger husband, her life's purpose fulfilled for her family. While the nobility arranged alliances over boars and blue velvet, the vast majority of people lived a life dictated by the sun, the soil, and the unrelenting hunger. Meet Thomas and Agnes, a peasant couple whose lives intersect with the fringes of the great estates, their existence a stark contrast to Isolde's gilded cage. Thomas, a 20-year-old villein, a low-ranking serf on the Ashworth estate, and Agnes, the baker's daughter from the nearby village, had a wedding rooted in necessity, not dynastic strategy. They were able to choose each other, unlike the nobility, but their marriage was still a practical merging of two families' labor power. Their ceremony was quick and informal, often taking place on a Tuesday, which was considered luckier than Friday. No elaborate gowns here. Agnes wore her best plain woolen dress, perhaps dyed a pale red with local berries, and a simple wreath of meadow flowers in her hair. The binding moment was the simple exchange of vows and the blessing of the local priest. Their feast was a communal potluck. Tough oat bread, maybe a scrawny chicken, and copious amounts of thin ale, the main beverage for all classes, as the village water was often contaminated and dangerous. Thomas and Agnes's diet was meager but surprisingly varied when times were good. Their staple was a coarse, heavy, unsweetened bread made from wheat, rye, and barley. This bread was so gritty from the rough millstones used to grind the grain that it literally wore down the teeth of the populace, leading to painful dental abscesses that were a constant threat to life. Meat was a luxury, but they occasionally had salted pork or poultry. However, their true sustenance came from stews made of root vegetables, cabbage, and pulses. Crucially, they drank huge quantities of ale or small beer. This was not the strong alcoholic beverage of today, but a weak fermented brew made with water that had been boiled, making it a safe and essential source of hydration. Children and adults drank it all day long. Thomas and Agnes's home was a single, dark, smoky room, a small windowless structure with wattle and daub walls and a thatched roof. The fire for cooking and heat was a simple hearth in the center of the earthen floor. Chimneys were a noble luxury. Their smoke was meant to drift out through a hole in the roof, but often filled the room, giving everything a pungent, smoky smell. Privacy was a myth. The family, and often their few animals, such as a cow or chickens for warmth and safety, all shared the space. Their bed was a rough wooden frame topped with a thin mattress stuffed with straw, which needed to be changed frequently. Most people simply slept on the floor on piled straw. Their life was one of constant labor, driven by the agrarian calendar, from sunrise to sunset, with Sundays and holy days being the only true respite, usually filled with church obligations and community gathering. Beyond the castles and the crofts lay a world governed by superstitions and laws that defy modern logic, revealing a layer of medieval life that is both astonishing and darkly humorous. The high fashion of the foot. One of the most bizarre aristocratic fashions of the 14th century were the poulaines, or Krakow shoes. These were highly stylish, soft leather shoes with absurdly long, pointed toes that could extend up to 2 feet beyond the wearer's foot. They were a sign of immense wealth, as they were impossible to wear for manual labor. The longest-toed shoes were so impractical that the tips often had to be tied with fine chains to the wearer's knees to prevent them from tripping. An edict even had to be passed to limit their length, as they became so extreme they were considered a public nuisance. In a truly astonishing legal twist, the medieval justice system sometimes put animals on trial for crimes. Yes, you read that right. The question of whether an animal possessed a soul or moral agency was a serious matter. Cases are recorded across Europe where pigs, oxen, and even pests like beetles and rats were formally charged with crimes ranging from murder, often a pig that had trampled a child, to damage of property. In 1457, in Savigny, France, a sow was arrested, formally tried in court, and after numerous human witnesses testified against her, she was found guilty of murder and was sentenced to be hanged in the public square. A rooster was also once put on trial for the crime of laying an egg, a perceived act of evil perversion, and was summarily executed. The secret life of bathing. The popular modern image of the Middle Ages as an era of total filth is often oversimplified. While the peasantry had limited access to large amounts of hot water, the aristocracy and city dwellers often had a sophisticated system of public bathhouses. These bathhouses, or stews, were more than just places to clean. They were social hubs, offering food, drink, and conversation. The wealthy also maintained private wooden tubs. It was the devastating arrival of the Black Death and the religious fear that large, intimate public gatherings were immoral or spread disease that ultimately led to the decline of public bathing in the later medieval period, leading to a much dirtier Europe in the centuries that followed. The currency of eels. In regions of England crisscrossed by rivers and marshes, the most common form of currency among the peasantry was not coin, but eels. Records exist showing that land was often rented and taxes were paid, not in silver, but in immense quantities of the slippery fish. One surviving document reveals a land rental agreement stipulating an annual fee of over 26,000 eels to the landlord. These animals were easy to catch, provided essential protein, and were a standard tradable commodity across the fenlands.
The enduring legacy. As the 14th century turned into the 15th, the world of Isolde, Alaric, Thomas, and Agnes slowly began to shift. The marriage of the aristocrats, driven by dynastic calculation, paved the way for the great land-owning families that would rule Europe for centuries. The dowry system and the focus on political alliances would remain for hundreds of years. Meanwhile, the simple vows, the ring exchange, and the post-ceremony feast of the peasants became the fundamental emotional core of marriage that endures to this day. The bizarre customs of the medieval era, the garter snatching, the kissing over the buns, the outdoor vows, are not just historical footnotes. They are the surprising, gritty, and often hilarious origins of the romantic traditions we celebrate today, hidden beneath a veneer of velvet, superstition, and a healthy measure of ale. The Middle Ages were a time of contrasts, of sublime beauty and brutal survival, of immense wealth and grinding poverty, where the most sacred moment in a person's life could end with their family trying to rip their clothes off. It was a time that proves history, far from being dull, is often stranger, funnier, and more astonishing than any fiction.